take it away.
Go ahead, Madam President.
Oh, me? Oh, sorry. Good morning. I'm the president of Okinawa JALT, Madoka Nagado. Thank you everyone for being here with us today. I'm very lucky to be able to welcome you who've been with us for a long time now, as well as those who are new to us. So yeah, nice to meet you all. What else? Should we talk about, okay, the theme for today's conference is the challenge of change. So I would say that the past couple of years have been challenging for many ways for all of us. But to me, personally, if I may, it has also been a lot of opportunities to collaborate with my co-workers and students. So I hope you'll make new friends here today. To end my greeting, I'd like to express my appreciation to all of you who helped us to make this event come together. And the special thanks goes to the conference chairs, Anne Handler and Max Diaz. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that. And I would like to echo Madoka's thanks to everyone for coming today. We hope that you enjoy this conference, and I am here today to introduce our keynote speaker, Dorothy Zemach. I first met Dorothy Zemach through a course from the International Teachers Development Institute about self-publishing. And it was such a rewarding course for me that I took it twice. My book is still not published, but, but it was still a very rewarding course for me, and it's only my own fault that the book is still not published.
Someday.
It'll get there. But Dorothy is a woman who wears a lot of hats as a teacher trainer and a teacher and an author and a publisher and a lot of other things as well. And I think that that might come up in what she talks about today. And so without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to her and hope that everyone enjoys.
Hey, thank you. Conference. Thank you, Anne. Let me share my screen. So I don't normally open with such a hellish landscape on my slide. I chose that to echo the title. You've probably heard that saying, whenever one door closes, another door opens. It's something that you often say to people who've lost a job or maybe gone through a divorce or suffered some kind of change that they did not want. And it's meant to be encouraging, but it's always kind of irritated me because I guess it feels unsympathetic to the situation that I'm in. So I always disliked that phrase until somebody said it to me and added, but it's hell in the hallways, acknowledging that those transitions can be difficult. And then I thought, okay, as long as we understand that it's not, oh, I lost my job, yay, new opportunities, but that I'm going to have to work through some things. So COVID came and I think threw us all into the hallways. And I want to talk today about how we can sort of future-proof our careers, not just against the next pandemic, but the next shift, whether that's a global shift or a shift in your family or a shift in your workplace. What can you do so that if something unexpected happens in the future, you won't have the rug pulled out from under you? And I do promise by the time we get to the end of this show, I will have come up with a much more pleasant and hopeful metaphor than hell. So don't worry, we're not going to go into a whole Game of Thrones landscape. We will end on a positive note. So what I want to talk about today is mostly these areas, a little bit about how work was already changing before the pandemic hit, what happened during the pandemic, what we can learn from that, and what it might look like going forward, what we need to get ready for, because some of the shifts that happened during COVID are still going to be there once the disease itself has subsided. So that's roughly our outline. I am going to make my slides available as a PDF, so you don't need to write down the content of my slides. But if you can grab a pen and paper or a laptop or a tablet, whatever you write best on, I do have a few exercises, if you will, that I'm going to ask you to think about. And I think it would be useful to take some notes that you can come back to later, but just as those thoughts are going by, that you might want to jot down. Not required. You don't have to turn them in. I'm just suggesting it. I am also going to warn you that I am going to explicitly mention money. And I know that that's a topic in many cultures, including mine, that people don't like to discuss overtly. But I think not talking about money hurts us as career professionals. So I'm going to go there. I'm going to talk about what you make and what you pay for. Be warned. This is a rough outline of my professional life in ELT. My very first teaching I did in 1986 when I got out of when I got my undergraduate degree, so right out of college. But I'm now, if you follow that sort of rainbow, I'm now in the purple phase of my life. So from 2003 until now, I have been entirely freelance, doing a number of different things. So I've actually been freelancing for 19 years. So that way predates COVID and all this talk about the gig economy. And I think that's also helped me see some shifts in how people work. And I also have some insight into what freelancers need to think about. So here's my first exercise that I think you should do not only now, but regularly. At some point, you should make a list of everything you do during a week. And I mean everything you do in terms of your work or your job, not your home life. Everything that goes into your job, whether that's grading papers or planning lessons or attending meetings, what do you do? Not your job description, but what do you actually do? If there are things that don't happen every week, but you still have to do them, run entrance exams or proctor final exams, note that as well. And then here comes the hard part. What do you earn? And this is the point where people feel uncomfortable with this exercise, because I think they're afraid to find out that perhaps their salary does not match everything they do, or that everything they do has changed more than their salary has. I think you should also make a list of everything you pay for, not like food and clothes, but everything you pay for that you need for your job. Do you pay for your Zoom account? Do you pay for your internet access? Do you pay your cell phone bill, but you use your phone sometimes for work? Do you have to buy special clothes for work, perhaps? So anything that you are buying because you need it for your job. And I do think you should repeat this. You don't have to do it, every January like a New Year's resolution, but a month or two into a new term, it's good to take stock and maybe compare it to the year before and see how those things have changed. So work was already shifting pre-COVID. And by work, I don't mean work in the global sense. I mean English language teaching work from my perspective. And here are some of the changes that I noted. I used to do a lot of travel around the world, primarily in North Africa and Latin America, a little bit in Eastern Europe and Asia. So I've spoken to teachers in many, many different countries who of course have different economies and different political systems, but I kept hearing the same story from everybody. Expenses are going up, right? Food, housing, the things that you have to pay for, and yet salaries were not. And salaries that seemed good 10 years ago just don't seem to be going as far today. when I get offered work by publishers or by the kinds of people who hire freelancers, fees have actually been going down. The amount of money I get offered to write, for example, a teacher's book to a textbook is significantly lower than it was 20 years ago. And yet my mortgage has not gone down. So salaries have stayed the same, fees have dropped. At the same time, expenses rose. As we started getting more and more things online, there became this tension of what can you get for free versus what should you pay a creator. If you use an image in your PowerPoint presentation, should you pay for that? Should you grab it off Google Images? Who created that image? And I hear a lot of, information wants to be free. I should be able to research and get the information I need without paying for it. You see in teachers groups on social media, people saying, hey, does anyone have a subscription to this library? I need this article, but I'm not a member. I don't want to pay for it. And someone will give it to them. But at the same time, people are creating more things and trying to earn a living off making those things. If they're not getting paid, you see the tension. Pre-COVID, I heard this phrase all the time, and it bugged me, in this economy. Particularly in the United States, perhaps that was the phrase that was used to shut down any kind of complaint about working conditions. Oh, fees have dropped, and someone will say, well, you're lucky to have work at all in this economy. An unpaid internship, well, you're lucky to get an internship at all in this economy. And I heard this a lot, particularly because I had a son who was graduating from university and looking for work. I banned the phrase, and I told him he was not allowed to say in this economy anymore because it's not an excuse, right? And if you buy into this is all I deserve because the economy is tough, it becomes harder for you to negotiate and harder for you to find good work. So if anybody is still saying in this economy, please stop. It's not helpful. But there was also a kind of pre-COVID inertia in some cultures, in some jobs. And I think every workplace, has their own culture. When I say culture, I don't necessarily mean Japan or the United States. It could be your company. Some of my examples are from Japan because that's where I was working, of a sort of determination that change was impossible. I mean, I think of you as pushing a boulder up a hill, you'll never get there. So these notes on the right, that's just to remind me what stories I wanted to tell you. Don't worry about those. That's just my notes. When I was working at a company in Japan, when I arrived, they said I needed to get a business card. And I said, yes, by all means, I need my business card. So we worked out how to write my name in Japanese, double checked my address. And then I said, oh, and I want my email address on the business card. And they went, oh, that's a little difficult because the person who had your job before you, the other foreign trainer, she didn't have her email on her business card. And I said, well, yeah, but that's because you as a company didn't have email, right? This was the early 1990s. If there's no email, of course, the email address isn't on the card, but I have email. So I want my email on the card. And they're like, yeah, we understand, but the person before you didn't have it on her card. And I said, well, the Japanese have it on their cards. And they're like, yeah, but the foreign person has to do what the previous foreign person did. So I eventually won that argument and I got my email on my business card, but it was a delay of over 6 months before we could get that through. And even that wasn't as bad as the argument that came up once I left my job in Japan. And I left on good terms. It was just my son was getting older and my husband and I wanted to take him, put him in an English-speaking school in our own country. So we were ready to go back home. And I had worked for years building up this beautiful program and a beautiful curriculum and all the materials and the textbooks chosen and whatnot. And someone casually mentioned to me that when I left, I would not be replaced. And I said, what do you mean I'm not going to be replaced? You're going to shut the program down? And they said, yeah, regretfully, we have to. We'll just outsource to a language school or something if people need English classes. And I said, well, why would you do that? And they said, well, the thing is that costs have gone up and we can no longer afford to bring a teacher and send that teacher back on the airline business class, like we did with you. And I said, you know what? I'm going to tell you a little secret about English teachers. And that is that we don't need business class. If you fly us economy and send us home economy, that's fine. And they said, yeah, but we can't do that with the new trainer because you had business class seats. And I said, yeah, and thank you, but I promise I won't say anything. I won't even meet your new trainer. I will not tell him or her that I had business class seats. They'll never know. I said, yeah, no, we can't do that. So I changed tactics and I said, well, why don't you hire an English teacher who's already in Japan? And they said, but that's worse. They wouldn't need an airplane ticket at all. And I said, right, because they're not flying, right? They could just come on the train and you could give them a train ticket. Couldn't do it. And I lost that battle. They would rather dismantle the whole program and outsource it to a solution that they thought would not be as effective because they couldn't make that change between business class tickets and economy class tickets. And my final example, so for the last 5 years now, I've been working on a large project in Algeria through the British Council and the Ministry of Education. There's a group of us who are training the middle school and secondary school English language inspectors. Each inspector is responsible in their own district of training the actual teachers. So we train the inspectors, inspectors train the teachers. So one thing inspectors have to do or should do is go and observe all of their teachers teaching. I think they're supposed to do it once a year or maybe more often. And in some smaller wilayas, some smaller districts, that's possible. But some of these inspectors have areas that cover hundreds of kilometers, and they might have 186 teachers in different schools. And they said physically, it's just not possible to drive all the way and observe somebody. I mean, you could do one a day, but it might take, an overnight, particularly if the inspectors were female and they still had responsibilities with the family at home, kind of traditional society in that way. So we would listen to these problems and say, well, one thing you might want to explore is maybe meeting some of your teachers on Skype, or maybe a video through Facebook Messenger. This is all pre-Zoom, right? And every time we tried to bring up something like that, video your teachers and watch the video, they'd shut us down and say, no, in Algeria, it's impossible. We don't have good internet. Nobody has good equipment. It cannot happen. So of course, my last 2 years on this Algeria project, and currently I'm seeing them again tomorrow morning, we're online. So some of that pre-COVID inertia, COVID came and it just pushed us into doing things that people had told us before could not be done. And I don't think that means every workplace is now super flexible and everybody just rolls with the punches all the time. I understand that there's still, there's still resistance and stubbornness, but a lot of teachers and students and parents and institutions learned that they could make changes that they did not know they could make. So I think we've lost some of that. But to get back to that question of money, I used to take an aerobics class, an early morning aerobics class at my gym. I think it was 5:30 to 6:30 or 6 to 7, some terrible time in the morning. And I would sometimes stay after and take a shower, so I go home all clean. And one of the other girls there in my class, she was a graduate student in special education. She was showering there all the time, temporarily because the hot water heater in her rental apartment was broken. And so she mentioned that she called her landlord and he had to, I think, come from another city to fix her hot water heater. And she said, you know, I feel really bad. You know, I feel bad for him because he's very busy. You know, he's a lawyer. And I said, well, you know, you don't have to feel too badly for him because he's a lawyer and he's wealthy enough to own rental property. So I'm sure he's doing fine. Whereas you are a student who's going into special education. And she laughed and she said, but I'm not in it for the money. And I almost let it go, but you know, it was just one of those days, I guess. And I couldn't. And I said, hey, can I talk to you about your attitude? Poor girl looked so surprised. And I said, but no, really, do you think you deserve less money? If what? If you enjoy your job? Or if your job is important? I said, what does your boyfriend do? And she said, well, he's in software. And I said, does he like it? Oh yeah, he loves it. So should he be paid less because he likes software or because it's important? But this attitude gets pushed on teachers everywhere. That's all over the world. I see this on Facebook and Instagram and, you know, in various forms. I teach for the outcome, not for the income. And we're supposed to be okay with not making money. This is actually the cover of a book sold on Amazon, sold to teachers that they're supposed to buy with their own money. It's like a yearly planner. And here's the table of contents. So they're supposed to buy with their own money an extra little book, which they'll put all these extra things into: birthday tracker, medication log, and whatnot. But they're supposed to be happy about their hard work and their low salary because they're doing it for the outcome, not the income. So I think we had this mentality going pre-COVID as well. So what changed with COVID? So one thing, I got a new phrase to hate. So I don't have to hate in this economy anymore. Now I can hate the new normal, because you know what? There isn't any new normal. Nothing is normal now, right? Schools are open this week and they're closed next week. And all my Algerian inspectors are meeting in person, and yet the schools are closed, and who knows what's going to happen in April. There's no new normal. What we have is a lot of flux and change and difficulty predicting things. And I'm not going to call that state a new normal. But what other shifts do we get? For one thing, travel disappeared. And that doesn't affect everybody, although it does affect students and where they want to study and their future goals. It certainly affected me. In 2018, I think I was home for 2 weeks at a time once in the entire year. And the rest of the year, I was out in different countries working. In 2019, I started in Algeria, was sent home when the pandemic broke out, and I promptly got COVID at home. So some jobs disappeared, right? When schools closed and they reduced staff, and I mean, some schools closed entirely, some jobs were consolidated. But for those jobs that didn't disappear, I think everybody got more work. And suddenly teachers are being told, oh, could you submit a lesson plan that's for a hybrid class where you're online, but some students are in the class, but some students are in the class on a computer, and other students are, you know, all this work increased, but salaries did not. Another thing that affected some of us was, you know, if you don't have a physical classroom, people were looking for digital copies of books, and sometimes they were paying for those, in which case, fine, we go on as normal. And in many cases they weren't, which hurts publishers who lay off staff. So we create fewer books. It's harder on authors, etc. But online exploded, right? I mean, if it weren't for COVID, I would not be talking to you now, because you're possibly in Japan, possibly in another country. I know you're not in my house because I don't see you. I'm sitting here in Oregon. All these possibilities for accessing information and accessing classes and accessing teachers, that opened way up. Even Algeria learned that they can be online. And I think the whole idea of learning online and presenting online and teaching online, we all got more comfortable with it, right? And even people who used to say, oh, I hate online, I'm not going to do another Zoom happy hour, are now feel kind of normal about having a meeting online or connecting online. I used to call my family members. Now we Zoom, right? Because we've gotten used to, oh, I can see their face and I could show some pictures, and right? So we have changed the ways in which we work. I noticed when my son came home for Christmas, he recently got a new job, and I said, oh, I'm surprised you have, vacation time already. And he said, what vacation time? I'm going to be working. I'll just work from Oregon instead of from New York. He said, the people I work with every day are in Ukraine. They don't care where I Zoom in from. Okay. His company let go of their expensive New York office, and they're not ever going to bring it back now that they know everyone can work from home. So here are my predictions for where work is going. I think full-time jobs will become more scarce, even in countries that used to have more full-time employment. But for those people who have a full-time job, if prices are going up and your salary is staying the same or even decreasing, it gets harder to meet your expenses with one job. And that's why people begin, a podcast on the side or a YouTube channel or writing some articles for money. So I think there will be more people who themselves are hybrid of an employed person and a freelancer. But how we work and where we work, that's blown open now. But also what kind of work you do or you can do, I think that's also changing, and we'll come back to that one. But we need to also take a look at what we're paid for what we do and what we pay for, right? And now that the world is open, we have to think about prices in other countries and not just our own. So I want to look specifically at those last four, one by one, and go through those a bit. So now that anybody can teach online and anybody can learn online, okay, most people can teach online, most people can learn online, I think there's a real insecurity for full-time teachers who are teaching in the same town where they live, because suddenly your university or your high school doesn't have to hire you because you're there, right? You're now competing not just with 6 other qualified people in your local community, you're competing with the entire world. And I notice in some developed countries where salaries tend to be high, a kind of nervousness among teachers thinking, well, but somebody in a country where costs are lower, like the Philippines or Argentina, could do my job as well as I do, and they might accept less money. So, but you can't necessarily accept less money because you still have to pay for prices. You have to pay for things at the cost where you live. But you're also, so with that insecurity, there's also a freedom because you're no longer geographically bound to a job, right? It used to be that if you lost a job, you would look around at what else is available where you live, because you might have a spouse who's employed or children in school or aging parents, or you can't get a visa to some other country. But that's no longer an issue. I recently interviewed a young woman teaching in Afghanistan, and she said laws are different all over Afghanistan. Nobody really knows how that's going to fall out. But in her particular area, she said the Taliban had told her she could not teach because she's a woman. So instead, she's teaching online. And I said, well, is the Taliban okay with you teaching online? And she laughed and said, they'll never know. So there's a positive side to being able to teach in a country where you don't live as well. So, you know, it's good news for some people and not good news for others. But also what we do, I think, is expanding. And there was this notion for so many years that a classroom teacher taught in a classroom, and that was all that they could do. I had a good friend at the University of Oregon, where I used to teach, whose job description changed kind of under her. She had what is essentially a non-tenure track job. And one day the university announced all the people in those jobs, we can't have that category anymore. So you need to now be on committees and doing service, and you need to publish. But don't worry, you have 4 or 5 months, you can reapply for your jobs, just submit this portfolio. So she came to me, we were having lunch and commiserating, and she said, I can't publish. And she said, how can I, in 4 months, identify a research area, carry out the research, find something of interest, write it up, submit it, have it accepted, and have it published? It's not going to happen in 4 months. So I thought, okay. But at that point, I had already dipped my toes into self-publishing. And I said, you know, I can make a book. You write something, give me the manuscript, I can have a book in a weekend. And she looked at me and said, but all I do is teach. I said, but here's the good news for you. Teaching is a thing. You could write a book about teaching or about learning. So we took one other faculty member in the same position as my friend, and we rented an apartment on the coast and took some laptops and went out with some bottles of wine and some bags of salty snacks and ordered in Chinese food and worked all weekend and came out with the first books in what is now, I don't know, maybe 16 books. I don't even remember how many I have in this series anymore. And about how to teach different skills in different areas, and a corresponding group of student books of how to learn. But neither of those original authors had ever considered themselves to be an author. They thought they were just a teacher. And I hope teachers will take stock of all the things they can do and realize that there are all kinds of ways in which they could branch out. When I got nervous about the ELT industry kind of drying up and royalties disappearing and fees lowering, and I started thinking, what else can I do? And I thought, okay, I can edit, I can proofread. I bet I could learn to edit fiction. So I did my first 2 books, I think entirely, I did them as a barter. So I didn't charge any money. I gave my services for free, and in return, I got book cover designs or something. But once I was experienced and I had a track record, I began working with more and more fiction authors. This is just a small selection of the titles that I've edited. And my website now says not accepting new clients for 2022. I'm not giving up ELT, which I love. I'm not giving it up yet. But if I had to, I have a second career in the wings waiting for me as a fallback. But it took me 2 or 3 years to sort of build up a credible side career. But I'm glad I did, because when COVID hit and I couldn't travel anymore, I took in more fiction clients. So when we think about what should be paid, I think that's so connected to the question of what you should be paid for. So as I put up these ideas, I want you to think both that, yes, somebody could pay me to do those things, but that means I should be willing to pay for those things. And I know that last one is hard. We do pay for social media already in terms of advertisements. I mean, we let them, well, I use an ad blocker, but if most of us let them serve us ads, and that's what pays for our being there. But so many of those other things, I think we're very used to as teachers being able to get for free. Your institution will give you Microsoft Office, your textbook should be free, images you can grab off Google Images, and it's a little uncomfortable when you think of, particularly if you think of freelancing, that all of those things might be something you have to pay for. If all of your webinars are free, does that mean that everybody giving a webinar should be doing it for free? And pre-COVID, I think I did a lot more kind of offering things for free. It was hard for me to say no. I felt kind of guilty, or like I might be a bad person for not caring about students or caring about other teachers or something. And I had to kind of grow a backbone and get better at saying no. So my policy now is I will do one free webinar a year. At that point, anyone who wants one needs to wait until the next calendar year. That way I still feel like I'm giving something, but I'm not taking my work life and making it volunteer. And I've also gotten better about telling people why I'm turning down free work. I had someone send me a Facebook friend request yesterday evening, and it wasn't somebody I'd heard of, but that's fine. We had a number of friends in common, and I checked out his page, and he was certainly in education. Looks like he did something with Afghanistan, which is an interest of mine. So I accept his friend request. This morning, a couple hours before this presentation, I get a message from him on Messenger saying, "Hi, do you have several hours a week to donate to our organization?" No, if I had several hours a week, I would be sleeping. But this time I told him, I said, "I'm sorry, I work freelance and every hour needs to pay. You know, if you're looking for a volunteer teacher, I suggest you look for people who are employed full time, or perhaps who are retired and have some kind of residual income." But I think 2 or 3 years ago, I would have just said, "Oh no, I'm busy," or, "You know, I don't really have time, but good luck." And I've gotten better at letting people know what you're asking for impacts my life. I'm not sort of an infinite well of volunteering, even if my heart would like to be. But teachers, as you know, if you are a teacher, you get hit up for volunteer things all the time. And I think during COVID and post-COVID, you, like me, are going to have to toughen up a bit and say, "I can help this much, but no more." And then we get to that uncomfortable question of who sets the rates. If a teacher in Russia is teaching a student in Chile, should the Russian teacher be charging what's common in Russia? Or should the student in Chile be paying what the normal rate is in Chile? And if countries have fairly similar price ranges, that's not a problem. But between, for example, the United States and Algeria, costs are extremely different. Right? And I think Japan also has that issue. So if you are a teacher living in Japan and you want to teach online and your students are in North Africa or Central America, whose rates do you go by? I'd give you the answer if I have it. I don't, but I think it's a question that we need to be considering and talking about. So here's another bit of homework that you could, or now work that you could write on your notepad. What can you do besides teach? And I think we get kind of a tunnel vision and think, well, you know, all I do is teach English. And I want to say you can do so much more, right? You could teach something else. And when you look on job sites like LinkedIn, if you change the word ESL to English or language, or you change the word teach to the word train that businesses use, you will see so many jobs come up that you are perfectly qualified to do that maybe you didn't realize you were qualified to do. So if you begin to think of the skills you have in terms of different words. Can you train? Can you mentor? Can you lead? Can you speak? Can you give presentations? Can you teach a course online? You did last year. Who's to say you couldn't teach an online course again, or make a static online course that you sell and get royalties from? Can you get paid to write? So there's so many things out there that I think people forget that they can do. If you feel that you can't do anything more than what you're doing, I would say the good news about being able to learn online is that you can now also learn online, that you can take courses, whether free or paid. If you're short of money, you can barter services, you can, trade things with other people, you could do a language exchange, you can get help from you can network with people online. So there are 100 different ways for you to get qualifications that you don't have. 2 years ago, none of us could use Zoom. Now, many of us can mostly use Zoom. It's not like I never make a mistake, but I would list that now on my resume as a skill I can present online. 2 years ago, I was a little nervous of that. So of course you can learn new things. And if you need to learn new things, it's now very possible online. I think networking now becomes hugely important, right? If you had to scramble for more work outside of your own geographical area, you would need to have connections in other places. So I think I'm going to assume that most people at this conference are on social media, because that's probably how you heard of it. But if for some reason you're not, or you're not active, then I think it's time for you to get active. And I don't mean active in a personal sense. I mean active in a professional sense, that you need to be on social media somewhere. I was recently invited to do a workshop in Russia. And the organizer, after I agreed, we negotiated the price and everything, asked me for my Instagram. And I said, yeah, I don't do Instagram, but hey, here's my Facebook profile. And he said, yeah, okay, we can use that. Russian teachers really use Instagram. And I heard what he was saying. And I thought, here's a man who's going to pay my airfare, pay me a nice fee, bring me all the way to Russia. Now I'm going to spend an entire month in Russia, because I added on more workshops here and there. So there's a month of work. And he's telling me that the audience of people who are going to pay to come to see me, they are on Instagram. So you know what? I got my ass on Instagram. And it doesn't really feel like me, but instantly I could see Russians interacting with me. And someone asked it, some teacher in Russia asked if she could do an Instagram live with me, which I'd never heard of, but what the heck, I did one. She's going to take me to the ballet when I go to Moscow. So those things can't happen if you're not out there interacting. So even if social media feels uncomfortable or you've had a bad experience before, I think at a minimum, you need to be on 1 or 2 channels where you feel at least somewhat comfortable. I don't know that it matters that much as long as you pick one and stick with it, but there has to be a place where other ELT professionals are gathering, other teachers, other administrators, other coursebook writers and materials creators and videographers, somewhere you can join the conversation, and a place where people could find you. I get cold calls for work off Facebook all the time. A lot of people get cold calls off LinkedIn. If you have a LinkedIn profile or you're tempted to make one, I would say go to this web address, which, remember, I'm going to give you the slides so you don't have to copy the whole thing down. Very good article on how to make your LinkedIn profile look good to other ELT people. And Matena is an ELT person, so she knows what she's talking about. I would also say the time to have a personal website I mean, it was probably last year, but if you don't have one yet, it's time for you to get one. And this took me ages because I could see no value in having a personal website. I thought, I have nothing to say. I don't want to blog. There's nothing special about me. I'm not going to post my pictures. I just could not see the point of it until I got one. And then I understood how useful it was. There's when people want to know, what can you do? I can show them. That's where my resume is. That's where a list of everything I've done is. So I have, an opening page that says a little kind of introduction, but then my whole resume is there. And I can break it out into different categories. You can click on any one of those, dig a little deeper and get more information. And people that I've never heard of are out there Googling and finding my website, and they read through it and they send me work offers. So if you're not currently looking for work, that's fine. You just say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm already fully employed, but thanks for getting in touch. But I also know, like, when I recommend other people to speak at conferences, the first question that's asked to me is, oh, do you have their website? And I can't say, oh, they don't have one, but here's their email. Nobody wants nobody wants your email. They want to see what you look like. They want to see what you're doing. So even if you feel you're doing very little, I would start anyway and begin. You could write your thoughts in a blog. What do you believe about learning and teaching? If you have a great worksheet you'd like to share, or you want to put up your teaching schedule. Students increasingly will be looking for teachers' websites. You can build websites for free, right? WordPress and Wix and whatnot are incredibly easy. I confess that I paid somebody to do mine and just set it up in a way that I could maintain, because I'm not a very visual person. So I wanted it to look good. And I thought, I know my limitations. I will pay a couple $100, get a nice site, and then I can just update it myself. Absolutely, you should join and participate in professional organizations. Again, since you're here listening to this, I assume I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. But if you've only listened and not presented, it might be nice to start contributing, write up a session and send it to the newsletter. Organizations are always looking for presenters and contributors to write things. And that's a fantastic way to meet people in your area, but also in your country. And of course, you can join international organizations as well. A lot of national organizations have ties to IATEFL or to TESOL, and you can get a discounted membership in an international organization and begin to branch out a bit. In this last year or two, I've met a lot of really good teachers doing fantastic work in Japan who are very Japan focused. And I thought, but what you're doing is interesting and important, and it would be great if you could share it with the rest of the world. And I bullied one of those people into getting a website so that we can begin getting her invited to more international organizations to share the work that she's doing. So even if you think that you're not worth a website or you don't need one, I will say, build one anyway, and you will be surprised at how useful it is and how many people access it and want the information that's there, and you'll come to depend on it. So here are some of my, when I say outstanding questions, I don't mean like, these are really great questions. I mean, these are questions that are still out there for you to think about and to answer. I'm just going to give you a moment to read through those. And I would encourage you to begin having conversations about these questions with other teachers or other people in your family, and just brainstorm with somebody you work with or somebody you chat with on social media. If your job disappeared tomorrow, where would you look? Where would you go? What other skills do you have? What else could you do? I don't think you have to be actively job seeking in order to be thinking about those questions. It just means when another change does come, it won't feel quite so shocking. And I think a lot of us at the beginning of the pandemic, there was just this feeling of hopelessness, like everything was canceled, right? You couldn't go outside. You couldn't, it was hard to get food, right? Remember when we're all washing everything when it came in the door, and you know, buildings were closed and schools were closed and travel was canceled. This was canceled and that was canceled. And it was really unnerving. But if you felt that you had options and there were other things you can do, it doesn't make those changes less significant, but I think it makes them less scary. And you don't have to feel as anxious. If you think, I've taught here for 25 years, I love my job. If it disappeared tomorrow, I could do this, I could do that, I could do that. It's going to be easier to face an uncertain future when you know that you have those things under your belt. So when I was thinking of all those questions, it reminded me of that Walt Whitman poem where he goes through questions, not about his career, they're more kind of personal philosophical questions. And he asks, of the questions of these recurring, and then he has a whole list of questions that you can look up. What good amid these? Oh me, oh life. We have all these questions. What is my worth in amongst all these questions? And the answer is that you are here, that life exists, an identity, that the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse. Especially for those of us in education, our lives matter. You impact so many people for so many years. What you do is important and it makes a difference. So in addition to nurturing your students and taking care of, you know, colleagues and parents and whatnot, put some of that attention and devotion onto your own career and your own future job prospects so that you can contribute a verse. So I did promise you we wouldn't leave this presentation in a barren hellscape, right? So if instead of thinking of a hallway that's hell, I don't think we're in a hall anymore. I don't think we're in a building anymore. We have left the building. So if you imagine that instead of a hall between other doors, you're actually on a meandering path through a forest. And it might still have, you know, some jungly bits and some weeds, and the sunlight is perhaps obscured by tree branches. It's not necessarily easy going, it's still challenging, but it's not on fire, right? And it is still a path and it is going somewhere. And if you have some skills and some directions and some confidence and some friends and some networks, you will emerge from that forest into whatever, into a field of flowers, into a grassy plain. And it's no longer maybe a choice between this door and that door. I think everybody's world has opened up a lot more, and we can put aside the metaphor of halls and doors and think more of paths and fields. So that is the end of my talk. I'm happy to stick around for some questions and answers and comments. If anybody has anything they want to share. I'm not quite sure who here from JALT Okinawa can help. It's a little hard for me to read the chat because, you know, I got bifocals and it's awkward.
It's all right. We got you. Thank you
so if you can
much.
read the question to me, I can hear it and I can answer. If we could do it that way, that would be great.
Sure. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'd like to ask everyone to unmute their mics and give a round of applause.
Yay. Yay.
Yay.
Yay, yay.
And if you have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat and I can read them out, or if you'd like to raise your hand.
I think Anna has a question.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment, actually. The very similar conversation going on for translators, for and between translators now. And as you mentioned, I also have a couple hats, and the translation community. This is very, very relevant in the translation community as well. So thank you.
And
thank
you've
you for
got that
the
whole conversation of, is Google Translate going to take my job? Like, well, no, and yes, and what does that mean? And how do you position yourself where you're still
Absolutely.
needed?
Thank you for the food for thought.
Reb, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for that talk. Very interesting. I kind of got a two-part question. You mentioned at one point where you said that you could, hey, editing novels, editing fiction, I could do that. Now, I guess most of the people in the call here today are some form of language teacher. So either the advice that we give in writing, it's like grammar, spelling, sentence level construction or whatever, or if we're doing academic, we're looking at research questions, thesis, referencing styles and so on, which is quite a bit different from fiction where you've got like 5-step story arcs, 12-step character developments, authentic dialogue. Were you qualified for that? Did you feel able to do that right off the bat, or did you have to do some kind of training?
I sort of eased into it, and I did a little bit of learn by doing, by telling someone, you know what, I could certainly fix your grammar and your punctuation. If you think the non-native speakers struggle with punctuation, you should see the native speakers. Oh my goodness, they're way worse. But there are also books on story arcs and what the genre expectations are for different, for romance or thrillers and whatnot. I started reading heavily in the genres I wanted to edit. I joined Facebook groups of authors and I hung out with those people and listened to them. So I kind of eased my way in. And the first actual books that I edited, I did not take money for. We did a sort of barter, and I said, I have to let you know that I'm new. And as I got better, then I started charging money for it. So it wasn't that I already knew how to do it. It was like, it was an adjacent career. And I thought, I bet I could learn. A lot of what I know about language is going to be relevant. And, these are, here are authors, and the questions that native speakers bring to me are things like, is it okay to use semicolons in fiction? Yes, it is. You should use them correctly, but absolutely, it's okay. Or I heard that adverbs are bad. And I would say, no, adverbs are not bad. So in some ways, I would say I'm better qualified because I don't come from the school of thought that has been taught by Stephen King, of all people, that adverbs are bad, because I know they're not. Although I would also say Stephen King doesn't really understand what an adverb is. Certainly his books have adverbs in them. But what was the second part of your question?
All right. So, and the second part then is this kind of comment on authentic dialogue. Look at the way Tarantino does dialogue in his screenplays, for example. I'm looking at the story arcs, the journey metaphor. Is it expected that a fiction editor is going to provide feedback on those aspects of the story as well? Or is it purely the mechanics of the language?
There's different types of editing. I now do developmental editing, where I do look at pacing and character and sort of big picture stuff. A lot of what I do is copy editing, where it is more grammar and punctuation, but also word choice. I mean, authors will get certain words that they repeat. I can now even tell by genres. In thrillers, everybody's always looking. They're eyeing, staring, gazing, glancing, glaring, because it's a way of exposing action with that your hero isn't doing. So I'm going through, taking out all their blind all the characters. It's like, nope, you've got too many of these words. I have an author who uses nodded all the time. People are always nodding. It's like, stop nodding. Romance authors tend to do this thing where they mix transitive and intransitive verbs. Again, these are native speakers. I've never seen a non-native speaker make that same kind of mistake. But after a while, you get used to it, right? And that, one thing romance authors need to watch out for is not everybody can have green eyes. Not every hero's lip can quirk all the time. So there's some learn by doing, but there's craft books out there as well that if you wanted to move into fiction editing, you can buy and read the same as any author. But I think it's that combination of your language cold, but you're also used to explaining things. A lot of fiction authors I've worked with, like more novice authors, have been told somewhere, hopefully not by Stephen King, but possibly, that the passive is bad. Actually, I think that comes from Elements of Style, dreadful little book. So they're going through their prose trying to take out instances of was and were. So they take out all the continuous tenses. And I recently taught one of my native speaker authors what the past continuous is for. And she's like, oh, I had no idea that it worked like that, that it shows an interrupted action. It's like, well, yeah, if you were in Streamline's book too, you would have learned that long ago. So we're used to instructing and explaining as well as just correcting and fixing. So it's not exactly like editing academic prose, no, but it's not a million miles from it either.
Thanks for that. Grant, I think you were Casimir putting her hand up there.
Yes, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. Really insightful, lots of good ideas, and also urging us to look at other possibilities. Yeah, I also feel guilty because I used to have a really big website for introducing Okinawan literature. I just took it down because it costs. Now I'm thinking I should get it back up again, but it's just so expensive.
Did you save all your material though?
Oh, yes, I have all the material.
Okay, so it might be just a question of looking for a cheaper way to host it or something.
Exactly. I was just tired of spending so much money. My question though, and I think maybe other people here are not a lot of what you said, at least for me, I'm thinking in terms of retirement. And when I retire, it's the perfect time. And I've thought this for a while, but and maybe being freelance, you don't see it so much in terms of retirement. But I'm wondering if you could comment about, transitioning to retirement with a lot of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Maybe there's nothing special about retirement from your perspective.
I've discussed this recently with my husband. So he's 6 years older than I am. So he's 63, something like that, 62, 63. So coming up to sort of the official retirement age, and he is also a freelance yoga therapist and artist. And I said, when you hit 65, are you going to do anything different?
Right.
And he looked astonished that I was asking. And he said, why would I? What I want to be doing is what I'm doing. That's why I'm doing it. And I guess for me, I feel the same way that, if one of those questions, like if you won the lottery, how would it change your life? It's like, well, I mean, I'd probably hire out the yard work, but it wouldn't change what I do because I'm already doing what I want to be doing. In the team of us who've been working in Algeria for these last 5 years, I mean, the lead guy on our team is in his, I think, late 70s and doing exactly what I'm doing, except slightly better. And, I think in my 70s, I would be too. So if you're not doing exactly what you want to be doing, then retirement is a fantastic time to do something else. But I mean, in this year, I've watched my parents age. My mother passed away. My husband has a number of aging clients. He had a client who passed away, of old age. And I do think when you retire, you have to do something, right? You can't just stop 40 to 50 hours a week and replace it with nothing. And that could be a time when you want to do volunteer work or consider a new hobby or dig more deeply into something. But when you stop doing something and your world shrinks, that's when people age more rapidly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, we none of us get out of it alive. You can't not die because you have a good hobby. But I can definitely see people age faster when they let go of connections.
Right.
So.
Thank you. Yeah, because I'm, with retirement, it's not that close, but pretty close. I very definitely want to get into some other things, and it sounds like
and
your advice is really helpful. But especially
putting out some feelers and collecting some information so that when you have more hours to devote to it, you know what direction you'll go in.
right. Getting how long do you figure is? I mean, obviously the earlier the better, but how much time in order to make a transition from current
Well,
work?
for me to go from not really knowing much about fiction other than I read a lot of it to being able to charge for it
Right.
and begin to like being able to like turn people down, 2 to 3 years,
3
which
years.
is, I think, not that long when you consider that, you know, I was also doing other things. I mean, it kind of depends how much you have to learn. But I mean, I think someone who was a skilled classroom teacher could become a good podcaster in a couple of years. I mean, you'd have to learn something about equipment. You'd have to see what the space is like. You'd have to learn how podcast channels work and how they monetize. I mean, there would be stuff to learn. But if you already have the skill of speaking and explaining and presenting and you're interested in things,
Yeah.
that's not a huge leap.
Great. Thank you very much. Yeah.
I guess we're kind of coming to the end of like the official presentation time,
Okay.
but we have a 30-minute break now before the other sessions start. So if people want to hang out together in the main room or get a cup of tea or whatever you'd like to do.
Is there a link to the main room?
This is the main room.
This is the main room. Oh, well, I mean, I would go get a cup of coffee and come back. I would hang out with people. I can't hang out forever because I have a class after this one, but I would hang out if anyone wanted to hang out with me.
We want to.
But I
hang
do
out
want
with
a
you.
cup of coffee. So
Thank you so much. Great presentation.
thanks.